Esther Sternberg is a world-renowned expert on the science of mind-body interaction, and her book, Healing Spaces, is a very unique and increasingly influential look at how cities, city spaces influence how we feel and how we behave. We're so lucky to have you with us here today to comment on the work we're doing and also to give us perhaps a broader idea of where this kind of research can take us in the future and how it might inform us.
Well, thank you. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be here because I think this is going to change a lot of the way that urban designers and city planners think and do their job. And why do I say that? In the world that we live in, unless you have hard evidence and hard data, it's hard to change the structure of whether it's how you build a building or whether how you build a city street. You need the evidence in order to raise the money, in order to make the changes, in order to have the political will to make the changes. And what you've seen here is real-life scientific data being gathered. And what I'll show you is I'll interpret some of that for you. I'll give you some background as to what all that means. You've heard the word arousal. You've heard the word mood, affect, cognition. The bottom line is whenever you walk through a place or a space, your brain is synthesizing all of the things that you see and hear and smell and touch and do in that space. It all comes together from every single sense and triggers either the stress response or the relaxation response or different parts of your brain that are involved in mood, in happy mood, sad mood, desire, and so on, whether you are consciously aware of it or not. And I think that's a very important point. Your stress response is being triggered. You saw the data from Colin. When you cross that street, even if you're not aware of it. Now that is actually a really good thing, because if you were asleep when you were crossing the street, what would happen when a car came along? You'd be run over, right? Your stress response is life-saving. Every animal, every living animal has a stress response, whether you're a fruit fly, a mouse, a cat, a rat, a salmon, a fish, a human, whatever in between. You have a stress response because you do not live if you do not have a stress response. If you don't have that increased vigilance, attention, and ability to fight or flee danger, like when you're crossing the street, you die. So we need a stress response. At the same time, we need a relaxation response because if that stress response goes on too long, you get sick. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I only have like 10 minutes, so I'll go briefly through some of these concepts. You heard about green space, and Colin mentioned that there's a large literature showing that green space is good for your health and good for your moods. And in fact, this has been done in terms of urban planning. It's been done in hospital design and in building design. And I'm going to go back and forth showing you evidence from building design as well as urban planning because a lot of this has been done in a more controlled setting in terms of buildings rather than city streets, because I really admire what you did. I mean, that was amazing. To do it in such an uncontrolled setting is pretty amazing. So how many of you would prefer to have this view out your window versus that view? Who likes the first? Okay. Okay, well, you're not alone. This is, anybody from Chicago? No, okay. These were the Robert Taylor homes, thank goodness. They were the inner city projects in Chicago back about 20 years ago. And there's a famous study by Sullivan and Kuo who measured people's psychological responses when they were assigned randomly to apartments that had either the first view, the view of the trees, or a view of a blacktop. And they found measurable changes in the kind of experiments that Colin showed you in terms of looking at psychological effects There was less aggression, less violent behavior in the people who were randomly assigned to live in apartments who had views of a grove of trees. Now, this has been done also in hospital design. Very famous study published in 1984 by Roger Ulrich, who showed that patients who were recovering from gallbladder surgery, whose beds happened to be looking out over a grove of trees, as opposed to a brick wall, the patients who had views of a grove of trees got out of hospital a day sooner, needed less pain medication, and had fewer negative nurses' notes. In other words, their moods were better if they had the view of the grove of trees. And in fact, that's what the question that I address in my book, in Healing Spaces, and you can see the little bookmarks around, you're welcome to take those, is what is it about looking at that grove of trees that helped people heal? And how could that work? Is it what they saw? Is it what they heard? Is it what they smelled? Is it what they did, meditating? What is it that helped them heal? And there's a huge literature, in fact, that can answer that question. Studies, research that was not necessarily designed to answer that question, but actually does answer that question. So the bottom line is that place shapes behaviors that are important in health. So those effects on mood, those effects on the stress response, have a very direct effect on health. And why is it? Okay, I'm not going to give you a quiz or a test at the end for you to reconstruct this neuroscience diagram, but the bottom line is if you start at the top there and you see the brain, when you're stressed, your brain's stress center starts pumping out a whole bunch of hormones and nerve chemicals, CRH, corticotropin-releasing hormone, doesn't matter what their names are, ends up with cortisol being released from the adrenal glands. How many of you have used cortisone cream for a poison ivy rash or cortisone nose spray for rhinitis and so on? You know that cortisone is one of the most potent anti-inflammatory drugs that your body makes. Okay? The Nobel Prize was awarded for the discovery that cortisone could cure or treat arthritis in 1950. And ever from that time on, cortisone was thought of as a drug, not the body's own way of regulating the immune system. But in fact, every time you're stressed, your adrenal glands give yourself a shot of anti-inflammatory cortisone, or same as cortisol. At the same time, you start pumping out adrenaline from adrenaline-like nerves and from your adrenal glands. That's what makes your heart beat fast, gives you the energy to fight or flee. That's what's making you get across Houston Street. You need that adrenaline rush to get across Houston Street and not get killed by those cars. So what happens, though, is you've got to turn off that stress response once it's turned on and done its job. If it keeps on going too long, you're bathed in this soup of anti-inflammatory hormones that ultimately tune down your immune system and makes you sick, because your immune system has to do its job. It has to go fight infection as soon as you're exposed to a bug or a virus. You can see that when you're chronically stressed and you're pumping out these anti-inflammatory hormones, you're more prone to more severe and more frequent viral infections. If you go out and get a vaccine for the flu, you're going to have less of a take rate, so you won't be as protected. There's prolonged wound healing, speeding of cancer growth, speeding of chromosomal aging. A person who is chronically stressed, their chromosomes look 10 to 17 years older than their biological age. If there isn't a reason to keep control of your stress response, I don't know what is. And I think the baby agrees with me, even though, so they're not there yet, but trust me. So you can't get rid of stress. Okay, forget about it. Life is stress. Stress is life. You can't get rid of the cars on Houston Street. You can do things in your own environment, the way Kaya showed, to help you cope with those stressful events. I want to emphasize, by the way, before I go forward, stress does not cause cancer. Stress does not cause the flu. Stress does not cause aging. Aging causes aging. Cancer genes and the environmental factors or whatever cause cancer. The flu bug causes the flu. But stress reduces your body's ability to fight all of these insults and to maintain health. So So what happens, what about place and space? Well, place and space and certain activities that you can do in that place can reduce that stress response. So we call it integrative medicine or complementary and alternative practices, meditation, yoga, tai chi. There was just I think there was a meditation or a yoga session going on just before. So all of these things, these kinds of activities, slow, deep breathing. Everybody take a deep breath. Take another deep breath. Okay, I can tell you that if I put one of those monitors on you, and I'll show another kind of monitor, a heart rate variability monitor, your stress response just went down. Almost instantly, you can measure it go down when you take a slow, deep breath. That's one of the common features of all of these activities, meditation, prayer, yoga. Exercise is your deep, slow breathing that gives this healthy relaxation response. So what happens when you do that? The stress response reduces, and another part of your nervous system kicks in, the vagus nerve. Anybody ever been punched in the stomach in the solar plexus and feel like fainting? I don't know, maybe you haven't. If you've ever fainted for any other reason, it's your vagus nerve that's doing that. Why are you fainting? Your heart slows down so much that you're not pumping enough blood to your brain and you fall. And the vagus nerve, now that's too much activity of the vagus nerve, but the vagus nerve counters a stress response. It's like putting the brake on. Adrenaline is like putting your foot on the gas and barreling 120 miles down Houston Street, and the vagus nerve is like putting the brake on. So anything you can do to put that brake on is a good thing. At the same time, when you do these activities, you release endorphins in your brain, you release dopamine, which is the nerve chemicals of desire, and that's good for the immune system and good for the heart. The thesis that I put forward in the book is that place can do all of these same things by inducing certain kinds of behaviors, putting you in a meditative state. What happens in the garden there? In the garden, people were more in a meditative, relaxed state. So place can either stress you, crossing Houston Street, or it can relax you. There are ways to measure these things. You saw from Colin psychological scales, and these have been around for decades and decades. The beauty of them now is you can do them in real time, carrying these portable devices and see how people are feeling exactly at that moment in time. You can measure saliva cortisol in saliva, and you can measure heart rate variability, which tells you the status of the stress response or the vagus nerve, and I'm not going to show you, but we've developed a way to measure actual molecules of stress or relaxation in sweat. So I want to collaborate with you, Colin, on your other way of measuring sweat. So the heart rate variability, just to tell you, the more variable your heart rate, the better it is. Low heart rate, high variability, health. How do you remember that? What's the worst possible pattern of heart rate? A flat, straight line, no variability, okay? You do not want that. You want lots of variability. So health is up on the top, lots of variability, illness is down at the bottom. So we did a study on office workers, this is with collaborators at the National Institutes of Health and Ohio State University, and others in the Netherlands, and we measured people's heart rate variability and cortisol responses and psychological responses to built space in an old, miserable, damp, smelly, dark office building before it was retrofitted, and then after it was retrofitted, beautiful, airy, lovely, low noise, airflow space, and we were able to show. So you can see the red line shows in the new office space that there's higher heart rate variability than the people in the old office space. And what's really important about that, and I think this is relevant to your studies as well in urban design, is this is happening at night when the people went home. People take their office buildings home with them. I think they take the city streets home with them. If you have a low heart rate variability at night, that predisposes to illness later on. Same thing with the stress, with hormone, the hormone cortisol. There was a higher level of this stress hormone cortisol in the morning when these people woke up, when they knew they were going to their old office space than new. I'm gonna stop it here because we don't have much time, but I think you can get a sense of where the future is going in this kind of collecting data. Navigation is a really important issue in a cityscape, and getting lost, being in a maze, is a universal stressor, again, whether you're a fruit fly, a mouse, a rat, a cat, or a human. And to the extent that we can design urban spaces to be more interesting, to be less stressful, I think we'll have a healthier population. I think I'm going to skip through this. One big issue, of course, in the current climate is obesity. You need to also design urban spaces to make walking more, to remove the hurdles from walking. New York actually is a great city for that. Believe it or not, I mean, you're smiling, there's a lot of hurdles in terms of the traffic, but New Yorkers are healthier on average and weigh about, I think, 5 to 10 pounds less than people upstate because they walk a lot. You give up when you try to get a cab, right, at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. So you need to design spaces that have all of these elements that reduce the stress response and enhance the relaxation response, places for contemplation and meditation, green spaces, art spaces, music, exercise, have areas for social support, and so on. Rick Bell is head of the Center for Architecture here in New York City. He did this wonderful project together with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Health, and City Planning Commission called Fit Cities, and he's taking this worldwide. These are the kinds of collaborations I think that are really important, that will come out of the kinds of data that you've seen collected here. Without collaborations between the scientists and the psychologists, the urban planners, the people who are putting this into action, you are not going to be healthier. But I think what's very hopeful to me is that we are there, we're doing this, and it's very exciting to be part of this. So thank you.